the world's longest-running show about data. Each week, host Eric Cavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on a show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Cavanaugh.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a high-speed, fast-track opening that was for DM Radio. That was pretty fun. Sitting here with Steve Sarsfield of OpenText Vertica. And wow, everyone's getting into the racing game these days, Steve. I remember SAP was doing it a few years ago. You guys are doing it. Makes a lot of sense. Tons and tons of data you can process. And of course, the key is the speed of the analysis, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about engines, we talk about the original racing for cars, right? A lot of that, the data or the things that happened on the original gas engine car races later helped that industry kind of expand and be better. And now we're looking at electric cars, and we're looking at e-racing, which is the format that we're talking about here. And those formats are really helping electric cars be better, and regenerative braking, the tire wear, all sorts of things kind of go into that to help them really win races, and it's been super successful for them to use analytics to do that.
Well, yeah, you can look at the data and understand exactly what happened. When did you get the highest throughput? When did you get the greatest torque? Now with electric cars, it's funny. I actually went to Belgium last year for an electric car race. And one of the guys, Ellis Spezia, I'm connected to him. He's a fantastic young man. He had the quote of the day, and it went into my headline: all the torque, all the time. I was like, what? Because it's just one gear, and it's electric, and when they just take off running, man.
So there's the race cars can go like 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds, right? They would go faster if they could, but I think they lose traction, right? So there's problems around losing traction if you go to 0 to 60 faster than that, right? And top speed of 200 miles an hour, as you saw. So just amazing stats that they have around that. I think a lot of those, you can almost do in a Prius too, right? So that low end torque is super, super important for electric cars.
Yeah, I'm told by the drivers that you have to be careful how you start, because it'll just peel out and spin around if you're not careful. So you do have to get the traction. But I think the key here is in terms of being able to capture all that data. So we have all these sensors now. IoT is just taken off. It really is just off the charts these days. And it's great because you can learn so much. And then to your point, that helps on the design front. It helps all the people who are building the cars, who are planning for the next version of these cars. And there's a lot of data to parse, to analyze. If you don't have a very significant and powerful engine, you're not going to be able to do a lot of that analysis. So that's one of the things you've been able to achieve, right?
Yeah, so we've got some other use cases around IoT data. One of the biggest customers we have is a company called Enritsu. Enritsu actually takes cell phone towers in Europe, and they take data off those. So you can imagine if you're a cell phone company in Europe, you might want to know whether your cell phone towers are being overutilized. And if they're being overutilized, I might want to bump up the bandwidth of that or put new cell towers in. If they're being underutilized, maybe I'm paying too much for my bandwidth, and I want to reduce costs with that, right? So all of that data from every cell phone tower kind of gets put back into a centralized system. Now you can imagine that's a lot of data. And they tried to do this with other solutions on the market, other kind of conventional solutions. So having a scalable database that can answer a query really quickly is a super fundamental problem that you have with IoT data. So taking all that data, bringing it back into Vertica and providing analysis around that, even selling some of that data back to the telcos is their business model. And it's been super, super successful for us. Again, tried to do it with other conventional databases, and they just couldn't get away with it. It was either too expensive or it just wouldn't work, just wouldn't answer a query in time.
Yeah. Well, everyone's doing the vertical orientation, columnar database compression, of course, works better than row-oriented because everything in the column should be the same. And if it's not the same, it's probably bad data. But, my history with Vertica goes all the way back to 2005 when I was the web editor at TDWI. And I got an email from someone saying, oh, this guy named Michael Stonebreaker is pushing this whole narrative of one size does not fit all. That was almost 20 years ago. And if you think about what happened after that, we had the whole appliance phase. Of course, we had Netezza, but there was Datopia. There were a whole bunch of them, Data Allegro, and that all kind of got consolidated. Of course, Netezza boxes are still out there cranking away. Legacy has a very long tail to it, right? But clearly, Vertica, thanks to Stonebreaker, who arguably invented the modern database, Ingress, right, in Postgres, he saw this coming. And it's interesting because, from a development perspective, and certainly in the hardware side, you kind of have to know where things are going and be able to sort of tack into the wind and plan accordingly. And I've been watching what you folks are doing now these days with expanding out with Magellan. Maybe you kind of talk about how that evolution took place, how you went from the initial focus of columnar storage, structured data analysis, but blazing fast speed, to now this more open view of the world as Gen AI comes in and, frankly, places everything in its crosshairs.
Yeah, I mean, I think behind Gen AI is machine learning and AI or AI algorithms, right? So in order to do some of those predictions that you have to do, it's all about, doing predictions in an algorithm. So training the models and then, doing predictions based on that. That's something that we added to the platform probably 2 years ago, and we started to continue to add machine learning and AI-based algorithms to the Vertica platform. It's interesting, I think when people think of Vertica, I think they think of that old Stonebreaker model, and they think of us around 2002, 2003, when we first came out, and we were really innovative when it comes to columnar store databases. We haven't been sitting still, though, that whole time, right? So we've been doing a lot of things. So columnar, yes, that's the basis. That's this table stakes that you have around Vertica. But we've added some really interesting things over the years. So machine learning, in database machine learning is one where not only can I do SQL queries, but in my SQL, I can have machine learning running and doing predictions around that. So if I'm doing, a shopping cart application, and I want to say, hey, you bought this, do you want to buy that? Right, a recommendation engine, I think, is a great application for something like Vertica. We were one of the first to do a separation of compute and storage on premises. Like there are some companies that have this new concept of taking a database and making sure your data storage is separate from your compute. That way you can scale and be elastic and all of that. We were one of the first to do that. We have partners like Vast and Dell and a lot of Cloudy and a lot of other object store partners that we work with, so that if you want to do that on premises as well as the cloud, you can very easily do that. So it's kind of this concept of being able to take data and move it seamlessly from the cloud and back and forth to on-premise, I think, is another thing that we've been working pretty hard on. So a lot of innovation since over the past 10 years, for sure.
Yeah, and let's talk about distributed SQL. So you have this new engine, right? So the original SQL has been around forever. It's a standard. It's a beautiful thing because a lot of people know SQL and know how to use SQL. Granted, again, this Gen AI stuff is disrupting a little bit, but SQL has been around for a long time. I don't think it's going anywhere. In fact, I remember the days when NoSQL came along and thought that was going to save the world. And then what happened is they all put SQL engines on top of their NoSQL databases. And so clearly that was a bit of a miscalculation. But can you talk about distributed SQL? How does that actually change from an architectural perspective? How does it change performance? You're basically enabling greater scale and diversity, but maybe talk a bit about what that really means.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I know that a lot of databases have distributed SQL, and it's sort of like a different syntax for the SQL language. So I see that also in some graph databases that are very popular in the market. For Vertica, SQL is SQL. So when you do a SQL command, it will work on one node and it will work on 30 nodes. And behind the scenes, we kind of take care of all of that processing and all of the work that you have to do in order to bring clusters or nodes together to answer the question. So SQL is SQL. SQL also applies, by the way, to data lakes. So we have the ability to go out and read an external table like a Parquet file or an org file. And the only difference between doing that and reading the direct database is when you're, when you're setting up, you say, select database as external table, select database. And that's the only difference. From there on, you can use the same SQL commands for an external table as you can for an internal table. So for us, there really is no syntactical difference. It's all kind of handled behind the scenes. I'll add one more thing too, and that is that we recently added Python. So that a lot of the young folks, when they're coming out of school, they want to do data science, they want to do Python. So now that's available as a main language for Vertica. So think about that. I've got a lot of data. I want to do some Python analysis of it, Python-based analysis of it, using pie charts and things like that. I can go use the Vertica cluster to access 1 trillion rows of data and use Python to do that. And so that's a feature that we recently added to Vertica.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. And it seems to me a case of rubber finally meeting road in data warehousing, hooking up with data science, because it's been my experience in researching this over the last 15 years that most data science teams are completely separate from the data warehousing folks.
I agree.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why would you? Because the whole point is to analyze your data to understand what's happening. And I think that's starting, and it sounds to me like you are a pioneer in helping to fuse those worlds, because what you want to be able to do is leverage the capacity of this engine to do massive amounts of analytics very, very quickly, and which is what Vertica has always been known for, but then bring in this other whole world, which is the context, right? So the unstructured is the context, and Python is a very powerful language in terms of being able to bring things together. For example, I remember this is several years ago now, but in the risk management space, Python is very well appreciated because it allows organizations to tap into multiple different types of systems and then build some rules around that, right? So instead of trying to do your risk assessment on your website or in your data warehouse or in your network, you're tapping into all that stuff to be able to get the biggest picture. And I think that's where this stuff is going, right? Is get the bigger picture now, do the kind of analysis we did before, but add all this context to it. What do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is this separation of data science and analysts, I guess, within an organization. We see that all the time. One of the things that I think is the first step for the merger of those two areas is to have organizations be able to operationalize data science, right? So in data science, what happens a lot is a lot of people bring their own tools, whatever they learned in college, be it R or Python or whatever, right? They bring them all in, they take all the data, they copy it to their laptop, they do the data science, right. But that's an experiment more than it is operationalized, right? So once that experiment has happened, and once you're like, hey, maybe I have something here, and maybe we should add this to our weekly, daily, monthly reports, then we can operationalize that. So let's bring that into a process where, I have the data. I don't have to move it out of any data warehouse or any data lake. I can just get access to it and then operationalize those predictions. And I think that's one of the things we're starting to see with some of our customers out there.
Yeah, well, that's, it's so funny again, and sorry for making this a history lesson, but when I first moved to Austin, Texas, I worked for a consultancy called Damon Consulting. It was a BI consultancy. And back then we used that word. And I remember it being in meetings like operationalize, that's kind of a clunky, bulky word, but it does speak to exactly what is needed. And that's finally happening, which I think is absolutely fantastic because the sort of process of just analyzing data for some human to absorb it and then make a decision, that's fine. That's one very good use case. But what you really want to do is be able to tap those insights right into some workflow, into some process, like a cart, for example, a shopping cart. What else do you want? And people have to understand the patience that consumers have for websites going slowly is like zero, right? Exactly. So, you have from like 2 seconds to 1 second, it's a huge drop off. I can't remember what the number was. Someone was telling me the other day that, if you wait like 3 seconds, like almost everyone goes away and they go and do something else. And so being able to capture the information, do the analysis, have the models in place, to trigger the rules, to trigger some change, that all has to be a rapid fire dynamic process for you to get your value from it, right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. There are some tough things that are happening behind the scenes, right? When you're creating a dashboards or you're trying to do some kind of operationalized analytics that reports back sub-second speed, right? One of the biggest ones are things like aggregate functions, right? You want to do count, or you want to do an average, or you want to do some kind of aggregate function behind the scenes. Well, every time you ask that question, give me the average, or the average of this week or whatever. It has to go out, pull in billions of rows, maybe hundreds of thousands at least, right, of rows, do an average, and then come back with that. So optimizations are really the key, and we've worked pretty hard on optimizations over the years in Vertica. One of the things we have is something called an aggregate projection. And so an aggregate projection, I'm getting kind of deep in the weeds here. I hope you don't mind.
That's good. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a way to kind of keep a running count of what the average is, or running count of the count. And so if you can always keep that on file or on ready, you don't have to do those long calculations. And we think about that a lot. Like, what are the long calculations that we can pre-do, so that when we return the results, we get them even faster. And that's part of the optimizations that we have within Vertica.
Yeah, this is really good information, because people understand ad hoc queries, they understand reports, and what you're talking about is really supercharging both of those environments. You want to supercharge the ad hoc. You want to predict what people are going to be looking for.
Yeah.
So that's something where machine learning is very powerful. It can kind of scan usage behavior. Okay, on Tuesday mornings it goes up. Let's automatically provision some more power to get through that period of time. There are all these little things that you can do, which in aggregate make a big difference to the speed of the solution and probably to the cost too. What do you think?
Yeah, two things to tease apart there. So number one is, I mean, you want to have elasticity. So there may be an end of month report, right, where you want to run it, and then you want that end of month report really quick, and then you want to spin down the nodes. And I think that is something that all databases should have at this point within their lifetime, right? The ability to, I want to be elastic. I want to run this end of the month report. After it's done, I can spin those cloud nodes back down. My data persists in a S3 bucket, maybe, which is separate, but then I can spin up and spin down those nodes. You also mentioned, though, kind of like using AI to do predictions around queries and optimizing queries. So that is a really, it ties into one of our features that we have that allows, essentially what Vertica is doing behind the scenes is watching all the queries that you make, and then saying, well, based on all of these queries that I've made, how could I reorganize the data? How could I create a new model so that when you run those queries the next time, it's super fast? And so we have some tools around that, using AI functions to do those predictions and make it. And that's all part of the platform.
Yeah, that is some good stuff. We'll pick that up after the break, folks. We're talking to Steve Sarsfield from OpenText Vertica, all about waves of innovation in the data space and the analytics space. It's changing rapidly, and it's mostly good news for all of you consumers out there. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things analytics at scale, waves of innovation with Steve Sarsfield of Vertica, now part of OpenText. And we were just chatting at the break there about developments in the industry and what's happening out there. And there is so much happening. And, we kind of hinted at Gen AI in the opening segment, but maybe I'll throw that back out there and just talk about where I see the future going for companies that really want to stay focused and get good information for their business people to make decisions. Well, that's the whole point of data warehousing. That's the whole point of analytics, is to be able to analyze large amounts of data, to see the patterns, to get some ideas of what to do. As we've already said, you want to operationalize that stuff, so it's not just on a dashboard somewhere, it's actually changing how the business gets run. But if you look at some of the broader movements in the industry, I was just joking that on the one hand, if you go to Google something, which we've all become addicted to, maybe you use DuckDuckGo, a few people use Yahoo, but Google's still the elephant in the room for sure.
Bing, don't forget Bing.
And Bing, right? Microsoft Bing. They're scratching along with this ChatGPT acquisition. I mean, that just that set the world on fire. Right? Then Google went whoa, and then Amazon comes in, throws $4 billion at Anthropic, and I looked them up. They're 80 employees or something. I'm like, all right, so that's a lot of money per employee. What are you guys going to be working on? I guess we'll find out. But my point here is that on the one side, you Google something, and you get all these sponsored ads. It's like 20 of them, and you're like digging down to finally get this done. Like, how many people go to page 3 when you Google something? So that's changing. It's, I think, losing some of its veracity that we've lived for years now. And then on the other side, you got Gen AI just sort of making stuff up. Well, what's in the middle? I think the answer is going to be in using embeddings for your own single instance AI model in your organization, which I think everyone is going to want to have one. I think that's going to be the new big thing, is that every company is going to go out there. They're going to pick their poison, either Bard or ChatGPT or one of these other ones. And you have to start out your embeddings. So what are embeddings? I'm calling it a second chance for data. That's my way to describe this. And I think if you're very careful about how you curate your AI engine with your trusted data, which you get from a data warehouse, for example, and from other sources, you're going to give yourself a real leg up in this next wave of innovation, which is Gen AI. But what do you think about all that, Steve?
Yeah, I think what's going to come down to is the software companies themselves are going to start to embed generative AI in their applications. Think about it. If you're a company and you make a human resources software, and it is a help desk for human resources, so people come, you can log into this portal, you can get answers about, your healthcare or whatever human resources question you may have. If you make one of those pieces of software now and you're not thinking about generative AI to improve your product, then you're probably going to lose the battle. So you think about that. Think about like all of the questions and answers that some human resource person has answered, but they probably answered those same questions over and over again every day, taking those emails, digesting those, and putting them into a better bot, right? Something better that answers questions. We've all used chatbots. Chatbots are terrible. But if you can make a chatbot that actually answers questions for you, then you have one leg up on the competition. So that's just one example. All the industries I think will start to embed generative AI within their applications. I know we're doing it here at OpenText for some of the other applications that we have. If you don't do it, you're really sort of out of the race, I think.
Yeah. Well, think about it. I think that the chatbots really took over or became prominent because in-site search stinks. Like if you ever go to the search engine for some corporation and search, I mean, Google had a whole line of business, other companies had lines of business around that, trying to enable enterprise search basically of content in your website. And you would get crap answers. You would just get like press releases and things that are meaningless. Like, I don't want any of that. Right. So that's kind of where it came from. But I think you're right that the Gen AI wave is going to fuse with the chatbot realm. And kind of to keep this focused on the analytics side of the equation, again, if you do your embeddings right, if you build out your environment in a responsible way, that's going to be your anchors of truth, is how Brian Raymond of Unstructured IO called it. I was like, oh, that's good. Anchors of truth. They're like moorings, right? Kind of. So because the Gen AI, what happens? So a good friend of mine came up with a great term. He said these large language models don't have an epistemological boundary, meaning they don't know what they don't know. And that's when they hallucinate and make stuff up, right? It's I won't name the country, but there's some countries I've been told don't ask for directions by the locals because they'll be embarrassed that they don't know, so they'll just tell you something. Go wandering off into nowhere. Well, you don't want that. So you want to have this trusted source. And I think that's going to be the job of data warehouses and true data products. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the call, those three engines have to come together. So you mentioned enterprise search, right? IDLE does a pretty good job, I think, with enterprise search. We've also innovated quite a bit with IDLE over the years so that your search results are a little bit better than they used to be. They're a little more intelligent. They use large language models, as I mentioned. So they're using language models to try to identify, for example, PII that exists within your big blob of text that works out there. So in terms of enterprise search, I think we're improving there too. I think with enterprise search, the value that you can add there is just being able to have a conversation with your data. So if you can type in, show me all the cars that are blue, right?
Right.
IDLE has analyzed all that, shown you all the blue cars. It can kind of bring back the results and show you that. So having that kind of conversation, I think, is will make it really easy for most of the organizations out there.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm reminded of an idea that popped into my head a few years ago, and I did a keynote on this before the pandemic hit, and it was all about AI versus data warehousing. And I said, I don't think it's AI versus data warehousing. I think you want both of these worlds.
Yeah.
And when you have them both, you kind of get a sort of virtual depth perception, because the data warehouse is going to give you the certified numbers that people work very hard on to get accurate as possible. And sometimes, of course, they could be a little bit off, but
right.
By and large, you can trust this information. That's your one eye, and let's say your right, and your left eye is AI, which is just surfing for things.
Right.
And what I've noticed is that with these engines, they will almost invariably show you something that you did not expect.
Exactly.
And so that's pretty cool, right? Because a big part of analysis is looking for the outliers. What are the outliers? Are they mistakes, or are they the trends? And there's always something. And there's something in the main, like wherever the main focus is, okay, well, you understand that. But whatever those outliers are, that's where you want to pay some attention. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, data lake and data warehouse are going to give you expected results. You're going to know, exactly what you want to ask most of the time, and it's you know that it's probably going to deliver the results that you expect most of the time. Again, with AI, generative AI, probably it's different. It's different that it may present some results that you hadn't thought of, and think of things that you hadn't thought of, and look at relationships that you may not have thought of that exist within the data. And that's going to be part of the boom for that whole thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what. So another great quote I heard the other day. I bet you like this one too. I was asking a guy, a CTO, what's your big thought on machine learning and what people should know? And he said, learning. His point was, like, we have to learn how this stuff works. And what I've noticed playing around with Bard and ChatGPT is that you do have to play around with it to kind of get a feel for it, right? This is an engine. It's like a car. I mean, you played that video of the guy from the race car, the Formula cars. You have to drive the car to get a feel for it. And the best drivers in the world, if they get a new car, they have to drive it around and just get a feel for it. And that's something what people need to do with this Gen AI stuff, especially in context of analytics, right? Because you're trying to find answers. So you start using this stuff, play around with it, just see what it reflects back to you. It's a very educational process that can happen like any moment that you use the stuff, right?
Yeah, there is this whole concept that some companies don't want you to use generative AI, right? They still want you to kind of use the old-fashioned ways. Right. I think that'll fade. Listen, when you need to write something really quick, a paragraph, and you can have generative ChatGPT or generative AI help you write that paragraph, super, super helpful, right? Obviously, it doesn't give you 100% perfect results. You have to go back and edit it, and that's why you're there, right? You're the human in the middle. There's a lot to be said about sort of the human or the person in the middle, right? One of the things that we look for example, in AI and IDLE, think about a police organization, and they have all of these tapes of people being murdered or killed or bad things happening to people. And your job is to kind of go through all of those tapes and look at that and say, okay, where is my suspect? Can I find my suspect in all this big long list of tapes? Well, if you have AI, you can get the bot to do that for you. I don't have to go through that physical trauma of watching all these crimes occur.
Wow.
And the bot can take it for me and say, here, this. I think these are the clips that you want to look at. Instead of looking at all 1,000 clips, I can look at these 5 clips and say, yeah, those are the ones that I want. So I think generative AI will help with that as well. And that's one of the things that we do in the IDLE world.
Yeah, that's really cool stuff. And, it's very powerful in the discovery side of the equation, right? You have discovery, you have inference, you have decisions that are made. These are different component parts of the workflow, if you will. And I've always loved discovery the most. Maybe it's just me. I think it's fun to kind of look around and wander around. And this gives you a much richer tool, a much richer platform to do that discovery. So it's not just, you think about it, first it was spreadsheets and we're like, look at the numbers, like, all right, sort top down, see what the biggest ones are, sort bottom up, see what the smallest ones are. Okay, something in between. a smart person can figure out a lot just looking at spreadsheets, but that's not very useful, really. Then you go to dashboards. Again, if you can drill down, it gets interesting because I can kind of drill around. Now with Gen AI, it's like an end around on the whole industry. You can just kind of go around this way and look into all sorts of different places. And I think it's going to be really important too to do some PII discovery to know what you're pointing this thing at, because there might be stuff in there you don't want the engine to see, and that's a big part of the process, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a lawyer and you want to kind of overwhelm a law firm, what you do is you drown them in evidence, right? You just take and you send them tons and tons of evidence, and you kind of just say, here you go, have at it, sue us if you want, right? So it's a room full of evidence that you're trying to get. Well, we actually have a division in OpenText, a part of our division that allows you to kind of do that discovery. So you mentioned discovery. If I'm a small law firm, or if I, don't want to invest in all that money of just kind of going through all those documents, I can actually do that discovery through AI. And it's super, super helpful to kind of get through that process as well. So, this is going to impact lawyers as much as it is anyone else within our organization.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And procedure, anything that's procedural, these Gen AI engines are pretty good too at knowing what workflows look like in processes, for example. And so, you can sit there and just learn. If you're a business analyst, and again, you've got some of this technology at your behest, you can search around and find all kind of stuff. Now, again, you have to vet it. You have to make sure that it's accurate, but the discovery side of the equation has just been blown wide open by this stuff, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, there's always going to be a human in the process, and I don't know if there's always going to be, but there should be, right? There should be someone, we kind of look at it as augmenting human intelligence with AI intelligence. And that's what we're trying to do with IDLE. That's what we're trying to do with some of the other divisions that we have within OpenText, is just augment what you have, making your life and your job a little bit easier.
Yeah. And talk a bit about IDLE. Just explain to the audience what that is and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, IDLE is really a collection of tools that really used for development. So we're really aiming this product at developers and people who develop their own applications and use these sort of tools to enhance applications that they have. But again, it's a way for you to look through voice, video, audio, and understand it and do some analysis around it. So if I have a video feed and it's facing a room that I'm pretty sure that no one is ever going to go in because it's a top secret room, I can set up a video feed and it can alert me when it sees a face and that walks in the room. Very simple. I can also set it up, though. Next level would be, only certain people are allowed in that room. So I can do facial recognition. And if someone is outside of the realm and they walk into that room, I can alert me for that. I can do things like a recognition of traffic that's going. So if cars, buses, motorcycles going down the street, I want to recognize those in a video feed and sort of accumulate some data around that. I can accumulate data around that. So voice, video, audio, that's the unstructured data we're talking about. But unstructured data also exists in big blobs of text. So I may have PDF files, I may have a OneDrive somewhere full of text, I may have TXT files, CSV files, et cetera, et cetera. So how do I make sure that none of those CSV files in my organization have personally identifiable information that's unencrypted? Because that's something I want to do if I'm a bank or if I'm almost any corporation nowadays. I can have IDLE do that. I can have IDLE go out and take a look at that, connect to those, and then try to parse through that and understand whether there's PII in there. Not only like US names and addresses, but global name and addresses, right? And so trying to understand that and making sure that we identify that is the key thing. So it's kind of a set of tools for allowing you to develop those types of applications within your organization.
That's great and perfectly timed as well, folks. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio. Got a couple of good questions from our live studio audience. And folks, if you want to be part of a live studio audience, just hop online to dmradio.biz. We link all the shows from there. You can also send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. That goes straight to me. And we're talking to Steve Sarsfield of Vertica, part of OpenText. One question for you. Do you still follow OLAP processing? And then we have a question on data virtualization. Start with OLAP, old online analytical processing that wasn't the kind of online we know.
Online
It goes back
analytical
before
processing, yeah, a little different. So the answer is yes, we still follow that. So, you mentioned Mike Stoneberg here at the beginning of the call. Mike Stoneberg had a really good story about OLAP versus OLTP. So there's online transactional processing where I can store a lot of data really quickly, and a lot of transactions, and there's OLAP, which I'm doing the analysis, right, of large amounts of data. His metaphor, and I thought this was brilliant, was the junk drawer metaphor. Right? Have you heard the junk drawer metaphor,
No,
Eric?
it sounds good.
Okay, so everyone has a junk drawer in their kitchen, and it's pretty interesting. You can either go and open your junk drawer in your kitchen. You can throw in some batteries. You can throw in some, I don't know, sewing needles, whatever you need to throw in your junk drawer. The problem is, though, if I just throw it in there, I'm going to have to search around a little bit, rummage around in order to find that again, right?
Right.
So just throwing it in there, that's a OLTP, that's transactional database. I'm throwing it in there, but later I'm going to have to go and find it again and sort through it. If I take a little time and I say, okay, I'm going to put some batteries in the junk drawer. Here's the battery place in the junk drawer. I'm going to just put it in there. And here's the sewing needle place. This is where I normally keep them. Now, when I go back to the junk drawer, I can very easily find my batteries. I don't have to search around. So it's either one or the other. A database is like a junk drawer, right? It's either one or the other. I have to either spend my time at the beginning and putting it in the right place, or I have to spend my time at the end and kind of sort through the junk drawer. Now, there are strategies around kind of bridging that gap between transactional processing and operational processing. Vertica used to have, as part of it, we used to have almost two databases, and a lot of HTAP systems have this, where they store data temporarily in a OLTP system, in a transactional system, and then behind the scenes they're kind of putting it away. So to me, that's kind of like you go and you put it on the kitchen counter and you say, honey, can you put this away for me? Right. So I'm done with it, but someone still has to kind of move it behind the scenes. Again, there's strategies for that. Another strategy that people use, like an Oracle, will use indexes, right? So you can throw it in the junk drawer, but then I'm going to put string and I'm going to tie it to everything, so I know exactly where the blue string has all my batteries, right? Again, it's pretty interesting. We still follow the OLAP principles. If you want to put a lot of transactions away, we recommend that you use something like Kafka in addition to Vertica to store the transactions, and then slowly behind the scenes you can put those transactions away really neatly in the junk drawer so that the answers will come back quick.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? That's a long answer, but
I love it. That's a fantastic can, because everyone knows what a junk drawer is, and everyone knows the pain of trying to find something. Oh, good grief! I'm not I'm not naturally organized. That's why I organize my week. Inside analysis is Monday. The briefing room is Tuesday. DM rate is Thursday. When I wake up, what day is it? Okay, I know what I have to do. But
it takes a couple extra milliseconds, right, to put it away nicely in the junk drawer in the database. That's why there might be other systems that you need to use for lots of transactions.
That's right. And I understand HTAP, hybrid transactional analytical processing, I think is what it stands for. But you do have to wonder at a certain point, purpose built is meaningful. And if you do the jack of all trades, master of one, I think was the original. So now they say master of none, but it's actually jack of all trades, master of one was the original expression. That's kind of what you're dealing with. And then in a related issue is this, Teddy is asking, what about data virtualization instead of moving the data? Well, it's not new, right? We had data virtualization 15, 18 years ago, and there are new ways of doing it. And one of those new ways of doing it is called generative AI.
Yeah.
It already grabbed it all. Now it's just going to bring it back to you. But what are your thoughts on analytics-focused data virtualization?
Yeah, the problem is disparate data, and it always has been disparate data, right? We have these data, it's stored all over the place, and so we can put a virtualization layer on it and then use the individual databases to kind of get access to it. We can use a data mesh or data fabric, right, and put kind of that thing on top of it and then get access to it. A data lake to some degree is going to be, also like that. So I can take all my data and I can just dump it in a data lake, and now I can mash that up against my data warehouse and data lake, and I have a data lakehouse. So, listen, we've had this problem of disparate data for a long, long time. There are a lot of ways to solve it. Data virtualization is one of them. Data lakehouse is another. And data fabric and data mesh are other ways. And listen, it just depends on your use case and how you want to get that, how you want to fix that problem.
Yeah, and data fabric is a very interesting topic. Data mesh as well. I'm still trying to wrap my head around exactly what data mesh means, and I think that it means different things to different people. But I think what they're trying to do is to replicate what Kubernetes did for processing instead for data, to find some way to optimize, which is, you could argue it's a form of data virtualization, right? You could argue it's a form of very intelligent and maybe hyper granular sharding, for example. I mean, they're just different ways to describe what's going on, but I don't know. When you talk about data fabric, what do you mean by data fabric?
Yeah, for me, a data fabric has a lot to do with creating a semantic layer of data. So usually I'm using some technology to create a semantic layer. For a while, I worked in the graph database space.
Okay.
And so, creating these, these descriptions of the connections between data and how data is connected, and being able to deal with sparse data. If you want to create a data fabric, is sort of the key component of a data fabric. Data mesh is all about creating a metadata layer, right? Not a semantic layer, right? So a metadata layer is a little bit different in that, it's sort of, I know what all the data is. I can define what all the data is. I'm not necessarily doing any relationship or between the data or anything like that. And once I have that metadata catalog, then I can go and pull in various pieces and do analysis around that. So it's just a minor variation, in my opinion, and that has to do with the semantic layer.
Yeah. Well, semantics are really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's another winning strategy for this new era of Gen AI, is to focus on an ontology and, frankly, to focus on graph, because graph is great for understanding relationships between things. And so it can be very helpful in terms of aligning where the data goes or who gets access to it. It seems to me graph is enabling technology for data mesh, for data fabric, for analytics in general. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. And I think the biggest challenge with graph, and I've written blog posts about this, is graph is very difficult to understand. First of all, it's not SQL, it's Sparkle or some other language that they have that is not necessarily easy to understand. And then you have to sort of also change your whole mindset to thinking about ontologies, thinking about triples, thinking about the relationships in the data. So you don't have columns and rows, you have triples, or you have subject, predicate, object type arrangements. And again, I think that's a big shift for a lot of people. That if there's a vendor that can make that easy, I think they will be successful. Other than that, it's kind of in the domain of really, really smart people who know and understand ontologies at this point.
Yeah, and you have to kind of know what you're looking for too, which is, I think, one of the key hurdles, frankly. And you have to know the syntax and how to actually tease that insight out of the system. Underneath, as an engine that's powering connections like Facebook and LinkedIn and all these guys, it's very powerful. But setting that up and getting it in production is a bit of a difficult thing. And then managing the data ingest and how it actually operates. To your point, it's not as intuitive as some of these other kinds of technologies, right?
Yeah, and you see where the market is going, right? It's going to ChatGPT, right? That's what we want as an interface. We don't want to set up an ontology. We don't want to write Sparkle code. Which can be, it's kind of SQL-like, but it's got a lot of extra question marks for some reason, like stuff like that. So, we don't want to do that anymore. We want to have a conversation with our data. We want it to understand human terms.
That's right.
So that kind of technology, it needs to have another layer on top of it that can do that for us.
That's a great way to close out the show here, folks. We've been talking to Steve Sarsfield, real industry veteran. He's been around the block a couple times, a couple different places, learned all about graph technology, analytics, and of course, these days, it's all coming together. And that is the truth. That's where we want to be. Like you said, the interface probably is going to be one of these ChatGPT styles or Bard or one of these other guys. that's probably going to be the place where you go to access all this stuff. And that's fine. Think about the old days of a portal. Remember the intranet or corporate intranet and a portal and all that stuff where you go to find the information? It's the same idea. It's the same model, but the stuff underneath is so much more powerful. Well, folks, hope you enjoyed the show today. Send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. You have been listening to DM Radio.